Howdy guys, I hope y'all are doing well. Today we're going to go do a study on Daniel 3. Now this is extremely relevant for our current age. And I want this video and the next couple, if I do more than one on this subject, to be something to help us. And I'm not talking about just y'all, I'm talking about me as well, to prepare ourselves for the resolve that we are going to need in the future. And I think that we can all see there are some things coming down the line that aren't very easy to contemplate, okay? They're not something easy to see a good outcome for it. Let's put it that way. But I want us as a church and as a Christian believers to read these things in the scriptures, to take heart of what they say, so that when we are tested in that day, we can stand. Okay? So let's start in Daniel 3, 1 through 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits and breadth of 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, and the judges, and the treasurers, and the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So who is Nebuchadnezzar? He is the king of the Babylonian Empire. At this point, Israel is no more. They have been conquered by Babylon. They have been drawn into exile, taken into exile by him, and are living within Babylon and throughout that empire now. Okay? So he is the king of this empire. Now here's the thing. As a king, what does this represent? Government. The king represents the head of government. Okay? And what does the king do? The government do? It sets up an idol for the people, the masses, to worship. So that people will... He sets up an image of himself so that people will obey it and revere and even worship them. It's easier to rule over sheep when they believe you are a god, when they believe everything you say, or they're forced to. Think of North Korea. Their leader is like the supreme ruler over that people. People have to, if the house burns down, you have to go in and get the image of the ruler before anything else. If you leave the image of the ruler, you can be killed for doing that. Even if your house burns down around you, you have to go get that image. Very similar to what's going on here. Okay? Now let's see what happens in verses 4 through 5. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, harp, sack, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up." Now, isn't this interesting? Who says this? The heralds. What would be a herald today? The media. The media cries out, "At the sound of this, you must bow down and pay homage unto your masters, your lords and rulers." It's the same stuff today. Like Solomon said, there truly is nothing new under the sun. Okay? Fair words and fair speeches. When you hear the sounds of lovely music, these things that will disguise the very act you're doing. Propaganda, to make it seem the thing you're doing is something good and okay. They used to do the same thing when they worshipped other idols, such as Baal. They would play loud music to get people in a trance to where they never heard the cries of the babies they put on the melting arms of the idol, to where they melted away and screamed and died. They only heard the music. And so people wouldn't contemplate the true evil that they were giving into. It is a conditioning method. When you hear these things, when you hear these things, you're supposed to get an emotional response. I need to do this. Just the same today when it comes to if you hear somebody say a specific word or a specific leaning politically, you automatically are conditioned to believe that person is bad or it's different or wrong. So it's a manipulation of emotions here. Verse 6 or 7. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time when all people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, I don't know what a sackbut is, but that is a funny name for an instrument, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So, how did they get the people to do this? At the threat of violence. Do this or else, is what the government says. Do this or else. And what happened? The masses bowed down and worshiped the idol, knowing it was a lie anyway. They still bowed down and worshiped. And here's the thing. They could, they're millions of people. You think they couldn't stand up to the king and say, no, we won't? We won't do this? And he have to acquiesce? Of course they could. But they didn't. The massive amount of people in the world, when the threat of violence comes, they will give in to it. Why? Because of fear. Fear for the repercussions of standing for the truth. So they would rather obey a lie than obey the truth, because the truth brings consequences. The truth will always bring consequences to our lives, because we face that every day, coming to the knowledge of the truth of who we are, to know that we ain't always right, we ain't always perfect, and that truth is hard to swallow. But then when it comes to this, on a mass scale of things, we see that following the truth in a world built on lies will have repercussions. Now what happens next? Verses 8 through 12. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. O thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whosoever falleth not down and worship, that he should be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now, these people are the lowest of the low, termites, trying to inform upon others so that they could attain a little more power, and so they could get more scraps from their masters, which would have been, in this case, Nebuchadnezzar. These are those that go door to door during the time of crisis and say, that person didn't get vaccinated. That person's a Jew. That person's this or that. So that they can get a little scrap of reward and you can be destroyed. These are those people that are so selfish and full of their own pride and egotisticalness that they would sell their own family out for a pot of porridge. Okay? You see a lot of that happening in Revelation during the time of mass delusion. Okay? But there is something to be said here about what they are doing. What they are saying here is actually not lies. That the government and the king did issue a law that the people should follow this. And the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not following this. Now here's the thing. Does something being a law automatically mean you should obey it? Or are there laws that when the law is expressed evilly, with evil intent, that you should not only not obey, but it is your duty to not obey it? There's something to think about. Now let's continue. Verse 13 through 14. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were actually people who worked for the king. They were people that worked for the government. It's ironic. Yet they didn't allow their own position in that government, their own positions of power, to cloud them to where they will be willing to worship a lie, to sacrifice their truth and honor and faith for a lie. Okay? They had their priorities right. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? They were not willing to sell their souls for a lie and for their jobs. How many of us are so scared to say anything just today? Now remember, what is the punishment here? You're going to be thrown into a furnace, burnt up, melted skin from your bones. And now today, how many of us are just not even willing to look for another job if we need to? Because we're so afraid of losing that. To sacrifice our own souls for a cup of porridge. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, we're going to skip this, ye shall fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast at same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? So literally, the government, the king, puts the dissenters' feet to the flames. Literally. To show the world their power over you. And gives them the option. Fall down and worship me. Obey me. And I will spare your life, because I have all the power, and there is none that can spare you. What is the God that can save you from my hands? Do you see the pride and the arrogance that comes with the people in power, people in positions of power? So literally, worship a lie or die. Now this is something that happened in the Japanese, when Japan had a bunch of people being sent over. I think it may have been like 1600, 1700, something like that. Priests that were sent to try to, convert the people. What the people did, what the Japanese administrators did, they didn't just kill the Christians outright all the time. What their goal was to get the dissenters, which would have been the people trying to convert the people to Christianity. They set them up to either fall down before them or die. Because when the people saw those that were standing fall down and worship, then the sheep would follow suit. So you see the predicament that they are putting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in. Okay, verses 16 through 18. Now I love these verses. I love them, what they answer. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. That's them saying, we don't need to think about this. We're not going to sit here and choose our words carefully to try to save our own skin. This is echoing what Jesus says to the disciples. When they bring you before the courts to condemn you, don't worry about what you're going to say. I will give you the words to say in that time, in that hour of need. They're following that same method here. We're not going to sit here and try to think through this, think our way out of this predicament, okay? If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Now here's the thing that is so important. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Whether God, now they say God can save us from this. There is no doubt in their mind. Our God can save us from you. But even if he chooses not to, we will not obey. We will not bow down and worship you. We will not bend the knee. We will not quake or be fearful. To the fiery furnace, whether we come out or not, God's will be done. They are owning their own lives in their own hands and putting it in God's hands. They are not allowing the government to decide for them. They are deciding that themselves. They are not slaves that bow down before and just whatever the king said, they bowed their knees and did it. They're not those type of people. These are the people that stood in the face of fire and chose for themselves how they would go. Now let's see what happens here. They had resolved it. They had already resolved it within themselves. They knew the punishment of what their crime was. Yet they had already decided before King Nebuchadnezzar even comes to them. They knew the punishment. Yet they had decided it is better to follow God and the truth than to stay alive and worship a lie. We have got, as a people, as a church, as a civilization, come to understand the importance of this. To be willing already, resolve it in ourselves to be willing to pay the punishment, whatever it may be, for the truth. Because no matter what the punishment is, no matter how bad it can be to us, that is the best situation that could ever happen to you because you didn't follow a lie. You didn't give in. You didn't allow someone else to decide for you how you would live or die. You decided that. And through faith, you overcame the world, okay? So, even to fight a losing battle, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were basically dead here. Even if God chose not to save them, they were still willing to fight that battle, even though it could have been a losing one. 19 through 20. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and in the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The visage is his face. You can see his anger boil on his face. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace to 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the furnace. So the king had power, but the king only has power that is given unto them. So the three would die, but it was they who chose their fate and not others. They were not slaves. They were free men. And just as Jesus says, if the Son sets you free, and what is the Son? I am the truth and the life. If the Son sets you free, free indeed you will be. Okay? These men were free. Now let's see a little humor put in here. It's not really humorous, but it is a little humorous to think about it. And he commanded the most, verse 21, then these men were bound in their coats and their hosen and their hats and their garments and were cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So in the midst of the king's rage, he heats the stuff so hot that he kills his own men when they go to throw it in there. Don't that sound like a government procedure? But anyway, so into the flames they go. What happens? Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4. 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. God indeed saved them. Through the midst of the fire, these 3 stood alone. Alone in the world, but not alone with God. When God stands with you, there is no you being in the minority. You are. When God is on your side, who can be against you? Now let's read verse 26 to 27. We'll come back to that 4th person in there. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God. Notice the change in Nebuchadnezzar now. Come forth, come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth from the midst of the fire. The princes and the governors and the captains, the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair on their head singed, neither their coats changed, nor the smell of fire passed on them. So the world had no power over these men of God. The world has no power over us because we are not of the world. The world, only power the world has is the power that you allow it to have over you. And so all these people see the miracle that took place. They see the true power of God in these three men. They see that. The world sees this. Okay? Then Nebuchadnezzar spake, and listen to what he says. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that entrusted in him, and have changed the king's word. Remember, before this he said, what God can deliver you from my power? Suddenly now it's this God that has overcome me, the great and mighty King of all, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which spake anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no God, no other God that can deliver after this sort. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So because of their courage and their faith, not willing to cow down to fear to those in power and authority, because of that, a king and an entire empire was changed forever by three people's faith. That's it. History itself was rewritten. And that shows you how much God can do with the littlest and the smallest among us. If even a few stand for what's right. Now, before we close, I just want to go to Matthew 28. Who do you think that person in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have been? Verses 19 through 20. This is Jesus speaking. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. So no matter what flames or what flood or any punishment that the world tries to put upon us, Jesus is with us through it all. Remember, he endured the greatest punishment of all already for us. And no matter what the situation, you are not alone. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that this was an edifying study and helps to strengthen our faith and our resolve for following the truth, even in the wake of any amount of hardships or trials that would come in from it. So thank you guys. I hope y'all have a great day, and I'll catch y'all next time. God bless.